David Shaw leaned back in his ergonomic office chair, fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as he wrapped up the final touches on his latest consulting report. The sprawling San Francisco skyline stretched beyond his window, a reminder of the tech empire he'd helped shape over the past 10 years. At 35, David was on top of the world, a self-made millionaire whose sharp intellect and tireless work ethic had carried him from modest beginnings all the way to the heights of Silicon Valley. As he hit send on the email to his latest Fortune 500 client, a slight smile of satisfaction crept across his face. Another seven-figure deal in the bag. Not that anyone could guess it by looking at him. His casual button-down and jeans set him apart from the designer-clad crowd in his field. And the beat-up Ford pickup he parked in the garage stuck out like a sore thumb amidst the gleaming rows of Teslas and BMWs. David preferred it that way. Humility and discretion were lessons he'd learned early on, especially from his mother back in Boise. The memory of her weary face after yet another double shift was still etched into his mind. They hadn't had much, but she'd always made sure he had everything he needed to succeed. "You don't have to show off to prove your worth, David," she used to say. "Let your actions do the talking." It was advice that had stayed with him, even as his bank account swelled to impressive numbers. After all, what was the point of flaunting wealth if it couldn't buy the things that really mattered? The buzz of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. A text from Laura. "Dinner at the Parkers tonight. Don't forget." David sighed, feeling a familiar tension creeping into his shoulders. These dinners with Laura's friends always left him feeling drained. He would have much preferred a quiet evening at home with his wife, but lately, she'd been pushing for more social outings, maybe hoping to steer him towards a more extravagant lifestyle. As he packed away his laptop, David's thoughts wandered back to the early days of their relationship. Laura had been a breath of fresh air, vibrant, driven, and full of life, pulling him out of his work-obsessed routine. He still felt a warm flutter in his chest when he remembered how excited she'd been when he proposed. But recently, that spark seemed to have faded, replaced with a restlessness he couldn't quite put his finger on. The drive home was surprisingly smooth, the notorious Silicon Valley traffic giving him a rare break. As David pulled into the driveway of their modest suburban home, he saw Laura through the window, pacing back and forth on her phone. Even from the car, he could tell she was agitated. He hadn't even fully stepped inside before Laura turned towards him, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her phone case. "There you are. I was beginning to think you forgot," she said, her tone clipped. David raised an eyebrow. "I'm home an hour early, Laura." She waved a hand dismissively. "Well, we need to leave in 30 minutes if we're going to be on time. The Parkers just moved to that new place in Los Altos Hills, remember?" "Right," David replied, doing his best to keep the exhaustion from seeping into his voice. "Let me just grab a quick shower and change." Laura's eyes narrowed as she eyed his worn jeans and scuffed-up work boots. "Please tell me you're not planning on wearing that old flannel shirt again. This is an important dinner, David," Jason just made partner at his law firm. "We need to make a good impression." David swallowed the retort that was on the tip of his tongue. There wasn't much point in reminding her that his shabby clothes had never stopped him from landing multi-million-dollar contracts. Instead, he gave a small nod and headed upstairs. "Oh, and honey," Laura called after him, her voice taking on a sugary tone. "Maybe we could take my car tonight? The truck's a bit noticeable for that neighborhood." David felt his jaw tighten but managed to force out a calm, "Sure," before disappearing into the bedroom. As the hot water pounded against my back, I tried to shake off the irritation building inside me. Laura didn't mean any harm, she always wanted what she thought was best for us, even if her idea of best felt stifling at times. 25 minutes later, we were cruising down the 280 in her sleek Audi, bought with my money, of course, though it was registered in her name. I had to admit, the leather seats were a lot more comfortable than the worn-out upholstery in my old truck. Laura chattered away, filling me in on the latest gossip from the neighborhood, who was feuding with whom, which couples were on the brink of divorce. I made the right sounds to show I was listening, but my mind was already dreading the small talk that lay ahead. The Parkers' new home was every bit as over-the-top as I'd imagined. A massive Mediterranean-style mansion sat perched on a hillside, surrounded by manicured gardens, and boasting a fountain in the circular driveway. I could almost feel Laura buzzing with excitement beside me. "Can you believe this place?" she whispered as we approached the ornate front door. "Jason said they got it for a steal, only $8 million. Can you imagine living somewhere like this?" I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that I could easily buy this house 10 times over without blinking. Instead, I plastered on a polite smile as the door swung open, revealing our hosts. "David, Laura, so glad you could make it." Melissa Parker greeted us, air-kissing both of us with the scent of expensive perfume lingering in her wake. Her husband, Jason, stood behind her with a wide, toothy grin and the kind of tan only California can offer. Come in," Melissa urged, leading us inside. "Dinner's almost ready, but Jason was just about to give everyone the grand tour. You've got to see the wine cellar, it's incredible." The next hour blurred by in a parade of high ceilings, marble countertops, and custom-made furnishings. I smiled and nodded at all the right moments, but it was hard to ignore the way Laura's eyes lit up at each new extravagance. The longing in her gaze was impossible to miss. Finally, we settled around a massive dining table that probably cost more than some people made in a year. Conversation flowed easily, helped along by several bottles of wine Jason was more than eager to showcase. "So, David," Jason said, cutting into his Wagyu beef. "Laura tells us you're in tech consulting. How's business these days?" I shrugged, keeping my response humble. "Can't complain. There's plenty of work to go around in the valley." "I'll bet," Jason chuckled. "Though I imagine the real money's in starting your own company. Ever thought about making the leap from consultant to founder?" Before I could answer, Laura jumped in. "Oh, David's not really the entrepreneurial type. He prefers the stability of consulting." There was something in her tone, disappointment, maybe? Embarrassment? "Nothing wrong with that," Jason replied smoothly, though there was a hint of condescension in his smile. "We can't all be risk-takers." The conversation shifted, but I found myself retreating into my thoughts. I watched as Laura laughed too loudly at Jason's jokes, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't around me in a long time. When Melissa started talking about their upcoming trip to the Maldives, I saw the raw envy etched across Laura's face. It was close to midnight when we finally said our goodbyes. The drive home was quiet, a thick tension humming between us like a live wire. "They seem happy," Laura said at last, her voice carefully measured. I grunted in response, not really sure how to reply. "Did you see that kitchen? I bet Melissa loves spending time in there. Remember when we talked about redoing ours?" "Our kitchen works just fine," I replied, my tone sharper than I meant it to be. Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not saying it doesn't, David. But wouldn't it be nice to have something a little more up-to-date? We've been in this house for 5 years. Don't you think it's time for an upgrade?" My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "We don't need an upgrade, Laura. We've got everything we need." "Need, sure," she muttered. "But what about want? Don't you ever want more than just getting by?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Getting by. We lived in a $1.5 million house in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. Laura drove a luxury car and had a closet stuffed with designer clothes. How could she possibly think we were just getting by? Of course, she had no idea how much money we really had. I'd always kept my finances private, not wanting wealth to change our relationship. Now, I was starting to wonder if that was a mistake. The rest of the drive was thick with silence. By the time we pulled into the garage, my patience was hanging by a thread. "I'm going to bed," I said as soon as we stepped inside. Early meeting tomorrow. Laura's face fell. Already? I thought maybe we could talk about. Not tonight, Laura, I cut her off, already heading for the stairs. I'm exhausted. I felt a pang of guilt at the hurt look on her face, but I pushed it aside. I needed space, to think, to figure out how we drifted so far apart without me even realizing it. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, hearing her words echo in my head. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were a confused mess of dollar signs and disappointed faces. The next few weeks blurred together, a mix of work and awkward, half-hearted conversations. I threw myself into my consulting business, taking on even more clients to distract myself from the growing distance between Laura and me. Meanwhile, she seemed to be spending more and more time with her real estate colleagues, coming home later with strained smiles and vague excuses. Everything came to a head one quiet Sunday evening. We were having takeout, neither of us feeling like cooking. The TV hummed softly in the background, filling the silence that had become the norm between us. So, Laura said, pushing her food around her plate, Stacy's having a little get-together next weekend. Just a casual thing with some of the girls from the office. You don't mind if I go, do you? I shrugged. Why would I mind? You don't need my permission, Laura. She flinched at the sharpness in my voice. I know that. I don't want you to feel like I'm avoiding you or anything. Are you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened in shock. What? No, of course not. Why would you even think that? I set down my chopsticks, no longer interested in eating. Come on, Laura. We've barely spoken in weeks. Every time I get home, you're either already out or about to leave. What am I supposed to think? I've just been busy with work, she said defensively. You know how the market is right now. Right, I said flatly. You've been so busy closing deals. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Laura recoiled as if I'd slapped her, a mixture of hurt and anger flashing in her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated with myself. Nothing. Forget I said anything. No, she said, her voice rising. I want to know what you meant by that. Do you think I'm not working hard enough? That I'm just pretending to have a career? Laura fired back. That's not what I said, I protested, but she was already on a roll. You know what? Not all of us can be high-powered consultants raking in six figures. Some of us are still trying to build something for ourselves. But I guess that's not good enough for you, is it? I could feel my own temper rising now. When have I ever said that, Laura? When have I ever made you feel like what you do isn't enough? You don't have to say it, she shot back. It's in every disapproving look when I talk about work. Every time you shrug off my ideas to improve our life. God forbid we actually enjoy the money you make, instead of living like we're still scraping by in college. There's nothing wrong with living within our means, I said through gritted teeth. Just because we don't flaunt every dollar doesn't mean we're struggling. Laura let out a bitter laugh. Our means? David, we live in a nice house, sure, in a good neighborhood. But you act like spending money on anything beyond the basics is some kind of moral failure. Would it kill you to want more? To actually enjoy life a little? I do enjoy life, I insisted. I enjoy our life. At least I thought I did. Apparently, that's not enough for you anymore. The words hung heavy between us, loaded with everything unsaid. Laura's face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. You know what? Maybe it's not, she said softly. Maybe we want different things. Maybe we're not as compatible as we thought. It felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. What are you saying, Laura? She stood up, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. I'm saying. I don't know. I need time to think, to figure out what I really want. Laura, I started, but she was already heading for the door. I'm going to stay with Stacy for a few days, she said without looking back. I think we both need some space to figure things out. Before I could even process it, she was gone. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the suddenly empty house. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the half-eaten takeout containers, wondering how we'd ended up here. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to tell her everything, about the real state of our finances, about the millions sitting in offshore accounts she didn't know about. But then another part of me, the part that remembered my mother's lessons about the true value of things, held me back. If all it took to make Laura happy, to make her stay, was money, was that really a marriage worth fighting for? The next few days passed in a fog. I went through the motions at work, my usual sharp focus blurred by the endless replay of our argument in my head. A dozen times a day, I picked up my phone, half writing messages to Laura, only to delete them before sending. On the fourth day, I came home to find her waiting for me, a small suitcase at her feet. For a brief moment, my heart leapt, thinking maybe she'd changed her mind. But the tight line of her mouth told me otherwise. We need to talk, she said, and in that instant, my world came crashing down. What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of my life. Laura, alternating between anger and tears, laid out all of her frustrations. How she felt trapped by our modest lifestyle. How she watched her friends move up in their careers, upgrading their homes and their lives, while she felt stuck. How she had grown to resent what she saw as my lack of ambition. I can't do this anymore, David, she said at last. I thought I could be happy with a simple life, but I'm not. I want more. I deserve more. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of it all. A storm of emotions churned inside me, hurt, anger, disbelief, and beneath it all, a cold, steely resolve. So that's it, I said after she finished. You're walking away from 5 years of marriage because I don't make enough money for you. Laura flinched. It's not just about the money. It's about feeling like we're moving forward, like we're building something together. But you're content just to exist, and I need more than that. I nodded slowly, a plan already starting to take shape in my mind. I see. And I suppose you think you'll find more somewhere out there. I have to try, she said quietly, avoiding my eyes. I'm still young. I have time to start over, to find someone who shares my goals. Someone richer, you mean, I said flatly. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. All right, I said, surprised at how calm I sounded. If that's what you want, I won't stand in your way. We'll get a quick, clean divorce. No fuss. Laura looked up, startled. You're not going to fight this? I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. What's the point? You've made it clear what you want, and it's not me, unless I magically become some flashy millionaire overnight. I caught the brief flicker of regret in her eyes, quickly replaced by resolve. She nodded, straightening her posture. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. We can keep this amicable, right? Of course, I replied, my tone neutral. I'll have Carla handle things on my end. She'll make sure everything's fair. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Carla, my high-powered lawyer friend, but she didn't comment. Instead, she picked up her suitcase, pausing for a moment at the door. I am sorry, David, she said softly. I do love you, I just not enough, I finished for her. I get it. Go on, Laura. Your new life is waiting. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a long, slow breath. I walked over to the window, watching as Laura's car pulled out of the driveway for the last time. A mix of emotions swirled inside me, anger, hurt, a bit of relief, and underneath it all, a hard determination. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Carla. It's David. I need your help with something. How fast can you process a divorce? The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and tense meetings. True to my word, I kept things civil, agreeing to a modest settlement that wouldn't tip Laura off to the real size of my wealth. Eager to start her new life, she didn't push for more. During one of these meetings, I overheard Laura talking quietly with her friend Stacy in the corner of the lawyer's office. "I'm telling you, Laura, this guy is perfect," Stacy said. "Nate Cole, he's got money, style, everything you've been looking for. And he's been asking about you." I turned away, clenching my jaw. So, Laura had already set her sights on her next target. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the speed of it still stung. The day the divorce was finalized, I found myself alone in the house we had once shared. I wandered from room to room, memories closing in from every corner. In the kitchen, I stopped, remembering all of Laura's complaints about wanting to remodel. Suddenly, a burst of energy surged through me. I grabbed a notepad and began sketching out plans for a complete renovation. Why not? The house was mine now, I could do whatever I wanted. As I worked, I felt an unexpected weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I had been holding back, trying to maintain a facade of modesty to keep Laura grounded. Now, I was free. Now, he was truly free. Free to live life on his own terms, to enjoy the rewards of his hard work without feeling the need to justify it or hold back. His phone buzzed, a message from Carla: "It's done. You're officially a free man." David smiled to himself as a plan began to form. He'd give Laura exactly what she'd wanted, a glimpse of the wealthy lifestyle she had been chasing. But by the time she realized what she had given up, it would be far too late. He opened his laptop and fired off a series of emails to his financial advisors. It was time to start making some very public investments. He'd let rumors of his sudden success spread, ensuring they eventually reached Laura's ears, always secondhand, always just out of reach. As night fell, David stood at the window, staring out at the Silicon Valley skyline, raising a glass of whiskey in a silent toast. To new beginnings, to sweet revenge, and to the lesson Laura's about to learn the hard way: be careful what you wish for. Little did David know, the wheels of fate were already turning. Across town, Laura was on her first date with Nate Cole, entranced by his charm and apparent wealth. She had no clue that the life she was stepping into was as fragile as a house of cards or of the storm looming on the horizon. David's phone buzzed again with a news alert, this time about a rising star in the tech world, him. He couldn't help but smile, a cold gleam of determination in his eye. The game was on. Weeks passed since the divorce, and David found himself settling comfortably into a new routine. His days were packed with work, while his evenings were filled with the quiet satisfaction of finally living life on his own terms. The kitchen remodel was moving along, and he'd started making appearances at high-profile tech events, carefully crafting his new public image. One crisp morning, as he enjoyed his coffee on the patio, his phone buzzed again. The number was unfamiliar, but curiosity got the better of him. "David Shaw speaking," he answered, his tone neutral. "David?" The voice on the other end was shaky and hesitant. It took him a moment to recognize it. "Laura." He worked to keep the surprise out of his voice. "What do you want?" Can we talk? Please. I need to see you." Her desperation was obvious, practically dripping through the phone. David's first instinct was to hang up, but something colder, curiosity, perhaps, stopped him. This could be interesting. "Fine," he said, his voice flat. "The cafe on 3rd Street. 1 hour." He arrived early, choosing a table where he could clearly see the entrance. Right on time, Laura walked in, and David had to stop himself from gasping. She looked awful, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, and her once pristine designer clothes wrinkled and unkempt. This was not the polished, ambitious woman who had walked out on him. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands fidgeting nervously with her purse. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly. David leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "What do you want, Laura?" She took a deep breath. I made a huge mistake, David. Everything's falling apart. Nate, he's not who I thought he was. We're drowning in debt, and I miss the stability we had. I miss you." David raised an eyebrow. "Stability?" He couldn't help but scoff. "That's rich coming from you. Wasn't our life too boring? Too modest for your tastes?" Laura winced. I know. I was stupid. I thought I wanted all the flash and excitement. But now." She trailed off, looking lost and defeated. "Now what?" David pressed on, his voice steely. "Did you think you could just crawl back, and I'd welcome you with open arms?" "No, I hoped." Laura's voice faltered. "God, David, I don't even know what I hoped." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I just know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life." I studied her for a long moment. Part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, took a dark satisfaction in seeing her like this, so broken. But mostly, I felt nothing. The woman sitting across from me was a stranger, someone I had no desire to know anymore. "Laura," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I make $1.5 million a year." The color drained from her face. What? "No, that can't be. You never." I didn't think it mattered, I cut her off, my voice cold and detached. "You left without ever really knowing me, without even bothering to look beyond the surface." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked as if I'd slapped her. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did we live so modestly?" she stammered. I let out a humorless laugh. "Because money isn't everything, Laura. I thought you understood that once. Clearly, I was wrong." She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "We can fix this, can't we? I was wrong. I was so stupid. I didn't know. Please, David, give me another chance." I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I saw was desperation and regret. But I didn't feel any anger or satisfaction. Just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "You already made your choice, Laura," I said quietly. "I'm not a second option. I'm not a safety net. And I'm certainly not a fool." Before she could respond, a man's voice cut through the tension. "Laura, what's going on here?" I looked up to see a tall, sharply dressed man approaching the table. Even without an introduction, I could tell this was Nate Cole. The flashy watch, the too-white smile, it all screamed new money and bad decisions. Laura's eyes widened in panic. "Nate, this isn't, we were just." I stood, gathering my coat. "I'll let you two figure it out," I said calmly, offering Nate a bland smile. "Good luck. You're gonna need it." As I walked away, I heard Laura's frantic attempts to explain and Nate's growing frustration. I didn't look back. Oddly, the encounter left me feeling energized. I threw myself into my work with a new vigor, taking on high-profile clients and making a name for myself in the tech world. Soon, my name was popping up in industry publications, and whispers of my success were spreading like wildfire through Silicon Valley. It was at one of these industry events that I met Chloe Adams. She was giving a presentation on innovative software development techniques, and I found myself captivated, not just by her ideas, but by her down-to-earth attitude. After her talk, I approached her during the networking mixer. "Impressive presentation," I said, offering my hand. "David Shaw." Chloe's handshake was firm, her smile warm. "Chloe Adams. And thanks." I was worried I'd put everyone to sleep with all that technical jargon. I chuckled. Far from it. Your ideas on agile development are fascinating. I'd love to hear more about how you're applying them in real-world scenarios. We slipped into easy conversation, talking shop and sharing industry stories. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the interaction. It had been a long time since I'd connected with someone on an intellectual level like this. As the evening wound down, I found myself hesitant to end the conversation. Listen, I said, I know this might be a bit forward, but would you like to grab coffee sometime? We could continue this discussion in a less corporate setting. Chloe tilted her head, considering. You know what? I'd like that. But just so you know, I'm not interested in climbing any corporate ladders or latching onto the next big thing. If that's what you're after, I'll save us both some time. For the first time in a while, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Chloe, that might be the most refreshing thing I've heard all year. What started as a casual coffee date soon stretched into dinner, which then turned into long walks, where they talked about everything from coding philosophies to their favorite books. For the first time in a long while, David found himself opening up in ways he never had with Laura. He talked about his upbringing, his mother's influence, and his real thoughts on wealth and success. Chloe, in return, shared her journey, her love for coding and her dream of using technology to make a meaningful impact. She was smart, compassionate, and wonderfully indifferent to any show of wealth. Weeks turned into months, and David realized he was happier than he had been in years. He and Chloe were a perfect match, challenging and supporting each other in equal measure. One lazy Sunday morning, as they lounged on David's patio, enjoying breakfast, Chloe brought up a subject they had been tiptoeing around for a while. So, she said, setting down her coffee mug. Are we ever going to talk about the elephant in the room? David raised an eyebrow. Which elephant would that be? Chloe rolled her eyes playfully. The one where you're obviously some kind of secret millionaire, but you live like a regular person. Don't get me wrong, I love that about you, but I'm curious about the story there. David was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. Then, slowly, he began to tell her everything, his childhood, his relationship with Laura, and why he had chosen to keep his wealth under wraps. When he finished, Chloe reached across the table and gently took his hand. Thank you for trusting me with that, she said softly. That can't have been easy. David squeezed her hand in return. Oddly enough, it was. That's how I know this is different. It's real. Chloe smiled, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Well, in that case, I have a confession to make too. David's heart skipped a beat. Oh. I've been secretly hoping you'd offer to fund my startup idea, she said, keeping a straight face. Then, she burst out laughing at the shocked look on his face. I'm kidding. Oh my God, your face. David joined in, laughing harder than he had in years. This, he realized, was what had been missing all along. Not just a partner, but an equal, someone who saw him for who he truly was, not what he had. As their laughter quieted down, Chloe's expression grew thoughtful. All jokes aside, she said, I do have a few ideas for socially responsible tech initiatives. I'm not looking for handouts, but if you're ever interested in collaborating. David grinned. I'd love to hear about them. Partners? He held out his hand. Chloe took it, her smile radiant. Partners. Meanwhile, across town, Laura's life was unraveling at an alarming pace. The cracks in Nate's polished exterior had turned into gaping holes, and she was quickly realizing she was living in a nightmare of her own making. It started with small things, bills arriving with "final notice" stamped in red, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when she walked into the room. But soon, the truth became undeniable. What do you mean the business is failing? Laura's voice echoed through their penthouse apartment. You said we were doing great. Nate paced the room, running his hands through his hair. I thought we could turn it around. The investors were supposed to come through. But now? Laura demanded. Nate's shoulders slumped. Now we're broke. Worse than broke, we're drowning in debt. The room seemed to spin around her. This couldn't be happening. Not again. But the cars, the apartment, our lifestyle. Laura stammered. All smoke and mirrors, Nate said bitterly. Leased cars, borrowed money. I thought if we looked successful, we'd become successful. Fake it till you make it, right? Laura sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Oh God. Oh God. What have I done? As the days passed, their situation went from bad to worse. The penthouse was repossessed, the cars were taken away, and Laura was left with nothing but the fallout of her choices. They moved into a cramped apartment in a part of town that Laura used to turn her nose up at. She tried reconnecting with her old friends, but the news of their downfall had spread fast. The doors that were once open to her were now firmly shut. Even Stacy, who had introduced her to Nate, wasn't returning her calls anymore. In a desperate attempt to rebuild her life, Laura tried to revive her real estate career, but her reputation was in ruins. No one was willing to take a chance on her. One evening, after yet another day of fruitless job hunting, Laura found herself staring at her phone. David's number glowed on the screen, a beacon of hope in her increasingly dark world. Her finger hovered over the call button. Don't even think about it. Nate's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his eyes hard. You made your choice, Laura. You're with me now, for better or worse. She looked at him, really looked at him. Gone was the charming, confident man she once thought she had married. In his place stood a bitter, angry stranger. Is this really what you want? She asked softly. Nate laughed, but it was a cold, hollow sound. Want? Since when does what we want matter? This is what we've got, Laura. Better get used to it. As he stormed out of the room, Laura turned back to her phone. With trembling fingers, she pressed call. It went straight to voicemail. You've reached David Shaw. I'm unavailable to take your call. If this is a business matter, please contact my assistant. If this is personal, well, you probably shouldn't have this number. Laura's breath caught in her throat. Even his voicemail sounded different. Confident. Successful. Everything she once thought she wanted. David, she whispered into the phone. I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything. Please call me back. I need help. She ended the call, tears streaming down her face. But deep down, she knew there would be no rescue, no second chance. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. Across town, David's phone buzzed with a missed call notification. He glanced at it, saw Laura's name, and without a second thought, pressed block number. Everything okay? Chloe asked, looking up from her laptop where she was working on their latest project. David smiled, a genuine, contented smile. Yeah, he said. Everything's perfect. As he turned back to their work, David felt the last remnants of his old life slip away. The future stretched out before him, bright with possibility. And for the first time in years, he was excited to see where it would lead. David sat in his home office, fingers flying across the keyboard as he put the final touches on his latest project. The warm glow of success surrounded him, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing elsewhere in Silicon Valley. A knock on the door interrupted his focus. Chloe poked her head in, her expression concerned. David, have you seen the news? She asked, disbelief in her voice. David leaned back in his chair, stretching. No, I've been buried in code all morning. What's up? Chloe walked in, holding her tablet. It's about Nate Cole, you know, Laura's new husband. His company just filed for bankruptcy. It's all over the tech blogs. A cold smile crept across David's face. Is that so? How unfortunate for him. Chloe studied him carefully. David, you didn't have anything to do with this, did you? David met her gaze, his expression steady. Let's just say I made a few strategic moves in the business world. If those moves happen to impact Mr. Cole's company, well, that's just how the game is played, isn't it? David said, his tone casual. David, Chloe responded, a mix of admiration and concern in her voice. What exactly did you do? David stood up, walking over to the window that overlooked the San Francisco skyline. I may have used some of my connections to ensure that Cole's company got blacklisted from key financial networks. Made it almost impossible for him to secure the funding he needed to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Chloe's eyes widened. That's ruthless. David turned back to face her, his expression firm. It's business, Chloe. Cole was running a scam, feeding off people's obsession with a flashy lifestyle. He just picked the wrong target this time. He paused, then added, and yes, it has everything to do with the fact that he married my ex-wife. Chloe pressed further. So, this isn't just about business, is it? David laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, it's very personal. I'm not going to lie about that. Laura made her choice, and now both she and Cole have to live with the consequences. Chloe was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Then she nodded slowly. I get it. I'm not sure I completely agree with it, but I understand. She looked at him earnestly. Just, be careful, okay? Don't let this consume you. David's expression softened as he met her gaze. I won't. This is the end of it, I promise. From here on, it's all about us and our future. Across town, the fallout from Nate's failed business was reaching its peak. Laura paced around their tiny apartment, her phone pressed to her ear. What do you mean, there's nothing left? She hissed into the receiver. There has to be something. Nate's voice crackled on the other end, full of frustration and defeat. It's gone, Laura. Everything. The business, the savings, everything is wiped out. Laura collapsed onto the warm couch, her free hand clutching her hair. How could this happen? You promised me, Nate. You said we'd be set for life. I thought we would be. Nate shouted back. But someone's been working against us, blocking every move. It's like they knew exactly where to hit us. A cold shiver ran down Laura's spine as she remembered her last conversation with David, the cold, calculating look in his eyes when he revealed just how wealthy he really was. Nate, she said slowly, I think I know who's behind this. What? Who? Nate demanded. Laura took a deep breath. My ex-husband. David. He's got more money and influence than I ever realized, and he's not the type to forgive. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Nate finally spoke, his voice was low and simmering with anger. You're telling me this now? After everything's gone to hell? Jesus, Laura, what else haven't you told me? The line went dead. Laura stared at her phone, tears welling up in her eyes. How had everything gone so wrong? Days passed, and their situation became even more desperate. Bill collectors called constantly. The fridge was often empty. Laura found herself doing something she never imagined, scanning the want ads for any job that would take her. One evening, as she sat at the small kitchen table, circling potential leads in the newspaper, Nate stormed in, his clothes rumpled and his eyes wild. Pack your bags, he barked, heading toward the bedroom. Laura jumped up, confused. What? Nate, what's going on? He was throwing clothes into a suitcase without care. We're leaving. Tonight. I've got a lead on a fresh start in LA. An old buddy says he can set me up with something there. LA? Laura blinked, struggling to keep up. You can't be serious. We're just going to run off. Nate spun around, anger flashing in his eyes. What do you think, Laura? You think we have any other choice? We're broke. Everything's gone because you didn't even know who your ex-husband really was. Laura flinched, as if she'd been struck. That's not fair. I didn't know. You should have known. Nate roared. You were married to the guy. I can't believe I was such an idiot. I thought I'd landed a meal ticket. But instead, I ended up with a clueless gold digger who couldn't even pick the right mark. The words hung in the air between them, ugly and raw. Laura felt something inside her snap. Is that all I am to you? She asked, her voice quiet but sharp as steel. A meal ticket? Nate's anger deflated a little, and he ran a hand through his hair. No, look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I'm scared, Laura. Everything's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. She looked at him, really looked at him. The confident, charming man she had once fallen for was gone, replaced by a desperate, broken shell. She made her decision. Go, she said softly. Nate blinked, confused. What? Go to LA, make your fresh start. But I won't be coming with you. Laura, don't be stupid, Nate pleaded, stepping toward her. We're in this together. For better or worse, remember. Laura shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. No, Nate. We're not. We never were. We were just two people using each other to get what we thought we wanted. But it's time to face reality. It's over. Nate stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he zipped up his suitcase and walked out the door. Laura listened as his footsteps faded down the hallway, waiting until she heard the elevator doors close. Then, alone in the quiet apartment, she let herself cry. Weeks passed, and Laura threw herself into job hunting with a desperation she'd never known before. She swallowed her pride and accepted a receptionist position at a small real estate firm, a far cry from her dreams of being a top agent. But it was a start. She downsized her life even further, moving into a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable part of town. Every day was a struggle, but slowly, she began to rebuild. One afternoon, as she was walking home from work, she spotted a familiar figure stepping out of a high-end restaurant. It was David, looking sharp in a tailored suit, laughing with a group of well-dressed executives. And on his arm was a woman Laura didn't recognize, pretty in an understated way, her smile warm as she looked up at David. Laura felt a pang in her chest. Not quite jealousy, but more like regret for what might have been. She watched as David helped the woman into a waiting car, his hand lingering gently on her back. He looked happy, truly happy, in a way she realized she had never seen him before. Before she could stop herself, she called out, David. He turned, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on her. The warmth in his expression faded instantly. Laura, he said, his voice neutral. This is a surprise. Laura approached cautiously, suddenly all too aware of her shabby work clothes and scuffed shoes. I saw you and just. She trailed off. How are you? David raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. I'm doing well. Very well, in fact. And you? Laura forced a smile. Oh, getting by. Starting over. David nodded, his expression unreadable. I heard about Nate's business troubles. Shame, that. The lack of sincerity in his voice was impossible to miss. Laura felt a flicker of anger rise inside her. Did you have something to do with that? She asked, her voice low. David's smile was cold. The tech world can be cutthroat, Laura. Nate should have done his homework before trying to play with the big boys. You ruined us, Laura hissed. Was that your plan all along? To watch us crash and burn? David's tone remained calm, unaffected. I didn't ruin anyone, Laura. I simply let the consequences of your choices play out. You wanted flash and excitement, didn't you? Well, this is where that path led. Tears pricked at Laura's eyes. I made a mistake, David. I know that now. I'm sorry. For everything. For a moment, something flickered in David's eyes, a glimmer of the man Laura had once known. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cool indifference. Your apology is noted, he said flatly. But it changes nothing. You made your choice, Laura. Now you have to live with it, just like I've had to live with mine. David, please, Laura pleaded, her voice desperate. I'm struggling. I could use some help, just to get back on my feet. David let out a humorless laugh. Help? From me? I'm not your safety net, Laura. I'm not your second choice. In fact, I'm not anything to you anymore, and that's exactly how I plan to keep it. He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at her. Word of advice. Stop looking for someone else to solve your problems. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet for once. It might actually do you some good. With that, he walked away, leaving Laura standing alone on the sidewalk, the chasm between their lives now painfully clear. Back home, David found Chloe waiting for him, a concerned look on her face. I saw you talking to Laura, she said softly. Are you okay? David sank onto the couch beside her, suddenly feeling drained. Yeah, I'm fine. It was strange seeing her like that. Chloe took his hand. Do you regret it? What you did to Nate's company? David was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he shook his head. No, I don't. They made their choices. I just ensured those choices had consequences. And now? Chloe asked, gently pressing. David looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the concern in her eyes, but also love. Real, unconditional love. Yes, he said firmly. It's over. Laura, Nate, all of it, that's the past. You're my future, Chloe. You and the life we're building together. Chloe smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. Good, because I've got some news. David raised an eyebrow. Oh. Chloe's grin widened. Remember that socially responsible tech initiative we've been working on? Well, I just got word. We've secured full funding. We're a go for launch. David felt a genuine smile spread across his face. This was what truly mattered. Not revenge, not old scars, but creating something meaningful. Something that could make a real difference. Partner, he said, pulling Chloe close. I think we've got work to do. As they huddled over Chloe's laptop, excitedly planning the next steps for their new venture, David felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He'd walked through fire, faced his demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Kim, Nate, the hurt of the past, it all faded into insignificance compared to the bright future ahead. He'd learned his lessons, paid his dues, and now it was time to truly live. Epilogue. Months later, David sat in his home office, sipping his morning coffee as he scrolled through the day's news. A small headline caught his eye, a notice of foreclosure on an apartment in a rundown part of town. The name on the notice? Kimberly Bowers Cole. For a moment, David's finger hovered over the trackpad, tempted to dig deeper. But then, he heard Chloe's laughter from the kitchen, smelled breakfast cooking, and realized he didn't care. Not anymore. He closed the browser window and stood, stretching. It was a beautiful day, full of possibility, and he had far better things to do than dwell on the past. As he joined Chloe in the kitchen, pulling her into a warm embrace, David knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. This was his second chance, his new beginning, and he wasn't going to waste a single moment of it.